In The Science of Mind on page 247, Ernest Holmes says, we are poised in a sense of peace, which comes from our complete faith in God as the light, power, and inspiration of our life. There will be no twitching of muscles, no uneasiness or anxiety about any outcome if we know, whether waking or sleeping, that every step of the way God goes with us. And remember that phrase that we use here all the time, God in me works through me as me, right? So if Spirit is light, if God is light, as Holmes just said, so are we. We are not just a spark of light. We are a huge globe full of unlimited radiant light. And today we're going to look at how we let our radiant light shine individually and collectively and in our community. Not just this church community or in this city or your city, but within the entire planetary community. But I'll get to that bit later on. Wynne Bullock, he was one of the greatest photographers of the 20th century, and his work is on display at over 90 major prestigious art museums around the world. And my gosh, his work is brilliant. Please look him up online because he kind of blew my mind. You will be gobsmacked at the things he was able to capture with just celluloid film. He passed away in 1975, so there was no photo editing like we have today. His work was incredible. But the cool thing is, he was born and raised a few miles away in South Pasadena. That's pretty cool. Amazing people happen here, right? Okay, well, my point is, he said, light to me is perhaps the most profound truth in the universe. My thinking has been deeply affected by the belief that everything is some form of radiant energy. Everything. Everyone is some form of radiant energy. You are the light, the radiant light of God in expression. We must know, capital know, the truth of our oneness with the divine. Now, how do we do that? Well, that's what we've been talking about since the very first week in September. We've been looking at ideas that bring new meaning to living from a place of true power by taking the word power and making it an acronym, P.O.W.E.R, to look at the qualities which, when combined, support us from living from that space. On the first Sunday of the month, my dad over there, the face maker himself, he started us off with the letter P, yes, you, sir, and talked about purpose, letting God be God in us, and being our most authentic, true God self. And we took a pledge to live in a state of possibility. If you're listening online, please reach out and contact us about your experience. All of the info can be found on our website, santanitachurch.org. And if you guys here or at home have not listened to the sermon or taken the pledge yet, there's no time like the present. Most of the sermons are on our website, the aforementioned one, yes. And I want to make sure that we start acknowledging all the folks who join us from home from now on, because we may not see them, but they're there, and they are engaged, and they are paying attention. So moving on September 11th, we looked at our oneness with God by knocking down the walls of old beliefs that have held us back for years and letting the light that is God shine up through us as us. That was a big one for me. And remembering and reconnecting with that transformative meditation experience I had 11 years ago let me feel and reconnect with the significance of the path that I'm walking today with renewed gratitude. And let's remember that beautiful Rumi quote we looked at, which said, "Why do we struggle to open a door when the whole wall is an illusion? All you got to do is pull out one of those foundational bricks and that whole wall comes tumbling down." Now, on the third week, Reverend Terry made sure we were all anointed with worthiness. That's the W in our acronym. Are you still feeling worthy? You should, because you are, and you always have been. And then last week, we talked about walking the inevitable evolutionary road for our E, and we discovered that, like it or not, change is always coming. And we said we're not going to be afraid of it. We're going to embrace it. We're going to do that because we know that it will always lead us to something or someplace wonderful. And that brings us today. Yes, I know, we're into October, but that's okay. We needed an R. We didn't want to have a P.O.W.E.R. So we have power. R stands for letting our radiant light shine. Hence all the light songs we think sometimes. Have you ever felt someone's energy before they even walk in the room? Yeah, I think we all have. That energy is divine light. So what makes that person's energy different from everyone else's? Not a thing, except maybe that the person knows how to tap in to that unlimited supply a little bit more effectively than we do in this moment. But we can and will learn how to do that today. Ernest Holmes said in The Science of Mind on page 191, more light will be given to us as we use that which we have. Isn't that great news? There's always more and more and more light, so people will feel you before they see you. Now that you know that, right? People who are around me a lot can tell you that sometimes I'll do so much for so long that all of a sudden I hit a wall. All the steam is gone, and it's like my battery has gone flat. My off-duty light starts flashing. And I know some of you guys must have wondered, I don't wear them when I'm up here, but when I'm not up here, I always have a cord hanging around my neck. Those are my earbuds. And I keep them on here because I found that when that battery drains, if I take a few minutes, plug those earbuds in and play some meditative music, and then focus my intention on re-energizing that love light that fills my body, I can often find that renewed energy and come back kicking again. That off-duty light goes out for a little while. Gordon B. Hinckley, he is the 15th and longest running president of the Church of Latter-day Saints. He said this, and I love this. He said, some of you may feel that you are not as attractive and beautiful and glamorous as you would like to be. Rise above any such feelings. Cultivate the light that you have within you, and it will shine through as radiant expression that will be seen by others. You need never feel inferior. You need never feel that you were born without talents or without opportunities to give them expression. Cultivate whatever talents you have, and they will grow and refine. Become an expression of your true self, appreciated by others. That divine light is never tiring and always there for us to tap into. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't days when we just don't feel like we're the light, right? I know we've all had moments throughout our lives when we're not only feeling like we ourselves don't shine, but perhaps sometimes it's really difficult to see any light at all. It can be kind of easy to slide right into Eeyore mode and moan under our personal rain clouds of woe. And we can go right ahead and do that for a few minutes, as long as we know that the stuff creating our Eeyore rain cloud is not truth. The truth is your unlimited divine spark. Even in the darkest part of the storms of your life, you shine. You just need to remember. And Ernest Holmes summed it up best on page 411 of the Science of Mind textbook. He said, the light is greater than the darkness, nor has the darkness any power over the light. The darkness is the great denial of the light, but it really did not deny the light, for where the light was, darkness was not. By merely bringing in the light, the darkness vanished into its native nothingness. So if we remember, the cloud goes poof, right? That's what it says. I also saw a quote on TikTok, of all places, while I was taking a break from writing the other day. And it is this: it's okay if you fall down and lose your spark. Just make sure when you get back up, rise up as the whole damn fire. And what was really cool is the lady who posted it had this powerful music going in the background, and she kind of lip-synced the quote with her eyes closed. And when she said, rise up as the whole damn fire, she opened her eyes and had these glowing flame contacts on. Goosebumps, folks. A 3-minute clip. It was done. The way that she did it gave it power. And now that you've got that mental visual, every time you need a reminder of your shine, or you need to grab a hold of your power through some circumstance or perspective in your life, I want you to remember that line. Rise up as the whole damn fire. Remember that line and make it stick so you see it every time you see your reflection. And here's the key. I want you to think the word love every time you see your face. And I want you to think the word love every time you see the face of another person involved in whatever struggle we're facing, even if they're not in agreement with you. Especially if they're not in agreement with you, you're going to think love toward them. Why? Because the key to letting your radiant light shine, the true power behind the R in our POWER acronym, is love. In Talks on Truth on page 64, Charles Fillmore wrote, love is in the world in a diluted form, as affection between husband and wife, parents and children, friend and friend, but it can be made manifest in its original strength and purity by each person's opening the fountainhead and letting its mighty currents stream forth. I love the idea behind that quote, that love can be made manifest in this world in its original strength and purity when we open the fountainhead and let its mighty current stream forth. But that idea begs a question, doesn't it? How do we open up the fountainhead? What does that even mean? We probably all have different perceptions of and answers to that question. And some would say it takes a lifetime of spiritual practice for us to do that. Others would say we have to have a personal, mystical experience of feeling God's love before we can do that. And yet others might say we have to reach spiritual enlightenment before we can do that. And the people who say these things may be correct. They are correct for themselves if they believe in those ways. Because we know that everything happens through the power of our beliefs and intentions, right? But I want to suggest that there is something you can do today, right here and right now. And I want to suggest 3 tangible, practical ways to open that fountainhead and let the purity and strength of love's mighty current stream forth from you, or to let love shine through. I came across this article in an old copy of the Science of Mind magazine called Reviving the Heart of Humanity with a New CPR by Dennis Merritt Jones, who some of you might have heard of. And it really inspired me. He wrote, "Mending the heart of humanity," or for our context, we could say opening the fountainhead. It sounds like a daunting task, but if we are willing to be proactive and act mindfully rather than react mindlessly or hopelessly, it can be revived. We must each become experts at administering spiritual CPR to every person with whom we cross paths on a daily basis. This includes our face-to-face encounters, both intentional and by chance, as well as the countless people we may connect with via the internet or see on television while watching the world news. Distance doesn't matter because we all share the same name, human beings, and we all share the same heart. And I want to suggest that when he says we must each become experts at administering spiritual CPR to every person whom we cross paths with on a daily basis, we must include ourselves in that mix. So here's the CPR. C is for compassion. So what exactly is compassion? I like Jones's definition. He says, compassion is the capacity to imagine what it must feel like to live inside another person's skin and take appropriate action to help alleviate suffering when possible. That's a good definition. And I believe it's one that is innate in all life. There was an amazing scientific study done in Canada less than 10 years ago. And it was done to see if rats had empathy and compassion for each other. And they do. In this study, some of the rats were caged, and others were in a very large enclosure, basically free. Researchers watched what the freed rats did for a month's time, and he found that they kept liberating the caged rats. They figured out how to open the latch, and they kept letting them out over an entire month, which the researchers said ruled out simple curiosity as a motivation. And what's more, the free rats would liberate the caged rats even when the trapped animals exited to a separate cage, which showed that the free rat wasn't simply seeking the reward of schmoozing with his friend. And the free rats also freed the caged rats even when they had the option of bumping open an identical container and obtaining 5 chocolate chips for themselves, which showed that their motivation to help was greater than their desire for a treat. And if you want to read the full article, I can point you in that direction. But if that quality is innate in rats, then it must be innate in us as well. And I love Holmes' take on it. In a Holmes Reader on Practical Wisdom, on page 61, he says, compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Compassion is the most gentle of all human virtues, for it is the outpouring of the divine givingness through all. You may have been here a while back when I shared a true story about a poor young man selling goods from door to door to pay his way through school. He was hungry, and when he reached into his pocket, he found that he only had a few cents. And so he decided he'd ask for something to eat at the next house in exchange for one of the items he'd been selling. But when he knocked on the door, a beautiful young woman answered, and his words got stuck, as they do when you're young and single and suddenly faced with beauty. Instead of asking for a meal, he spluttered and mumbled something out which sounded a lot like he wanted a glass of water. But the young woman thought he looked hungry, so she didn't want to embarrass him, so she got a glass of milk, and she brought that out to him instead. And he drank it slowly, and when he offered her one of the things he was selling as payment, she smiled and told him, "Kindness is always free of charge." And for many years after that, he'd think back on that girl and her compassion, and he would smile, because that singular moment inspired him to actively practice kindness throughout his life. Years later, that same woman became mysteriously and critically ill. The local doctors were baffled, so they sent her to the city, where specialists were called in to help. A Dr. Howard Kelly was called in to consult. When he heard the name of the town she came from, he was immediately on his feet. And remember when I asked you earlier if you can feel someone's energy before they've even entered the room? I think maybe a little of that was happening here, because when he entered her room, he smiled. Because although she was older, he recognized her at once. He immediately turned around, went back to his office, and was determined to do everything in his power to save her life. And after a long struggle, the battle was won, and she was well again. But before the woman was discharged, Dr. Kelly went to the business office and asked them to hand him the final bill for approval. When they gave it to him, he wrote something on it, placed it in an envelope, and had it delivered to her room. Understandably, she was afraid to open it. I mean, we all know how mystifyingly simple it is to rack up a several $1,000 bill with a couple hours visit to the emergency room, right? And like I said, she'd been there for a long time fighting this illness, so she wasn't quite sure how she'd be able to pay for it. But when she finally opened it, there was a zero balance and a note which said, "Paid in full with 1 glass of milk." Signed, Dr. Howard Kelly. Isn't that a beautiful story of compassion? Too bad it's not entirely true. It's been embellished from the true story to tug at our heartstrings. And I unembellished a whole lot of it, let me tell you. The original that I found was just violins and, oh, wow. But it did tug at the heartstrings, right? But so does the true story. So the true story, according to his biography, which was written by Audrey Davis, she said, and I quote, "On a walking trip up through northern Pennsylvania one spring, Kelly stopped by a small farmhouse for a drink of cool spring water. A little girl answered his knock and instead of water, brought him a glass of fresh milk. After a short friendly visit, he went on his way. Some years later, that same girl came to him for an operation. Just before she left for home, her bill was brought into the room and across its face was written in bold hand, paid in full with 1 glass of milk." The Davis biography of Dr. Kelly, it contains no mention of an impoverished student who had to sell door to door to put himself through medical school. Actually, he was the son of a well-off family. It also said nothing about him being hungry and needing the glass of milk, or girls being critically ill, or about her being sent to Baltimore in the big city because she'd fallen victim to a rare disease. In fact, nothing is said of her case to indicate that it was even remotely unusual or that her life was in any way in jeopardy, other than for Dr. Kelly's writing off of her bill for that long ago glass of milk. Her case was not remarkable in the least. So why is it a true story of compassion? Dr. Kelly, the real Dr. Howard Kelly, in his regular practice, he charged significant fees for his work with patients who could afford it. But he used those fees to make up for medical care he provided for free of charge to the less fortunate. By his conservative estimate, he neither sought nor received a fee in a whopping 75% of his cases. And for years, he personally paid for a nurse to visit and care for those of his patients who could not otherwise afford such treatment. So he provided them with both a doctor and a nurse without charge. Now, I would say that is true, no frills compassion. So that's the C in our CPR. Now to the P. In The Greatest Thing in the World on page 14, Henry Drummond commented on the beautiful passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7, which a lot of you probably know, but I'm going to recite them anyway for context's sake. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. Love is never boastful, nor conceited, nor rude. It is not self-seeking nor easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongdoing. It does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, trusts, hopes, and preserves. In a word, there are 3 things that last forever: faith, hope, and love. But, I know y'all know this, the greatest of them all is love. And about this, Drummond wrote, "Love is patience. This is the normal attitude of love passive, love waiting to begin, not in a hurry, calm, ready to do its work when the summons comes, but in the meantime, wearing the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit. Love suffers long, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, for love understands and therefore waits. So opening that fountainhead occurs when we call on love, which is always patiently waiting. We call on love by realizing and revealing the presence of God in the present moment. But how impatient we can be, right? Waiting for a computer to turn on, waiting for a light to change, waiting for our partner to arrive when he or she or they are late, waiting for our spiritual growth to show results in the world, waiting for the world to become a better place. How impatient we can be. But back to that Science of Mind article I found. Dennis Merritt Jones writes, patience is the ability to breathe and be with what is in the moment, trusting that as we continue to mindfully mend our own hearts one day at a time, the collective heart of humanity is also mending. The practice is to be patient with ourselves and all others, remembering that it can take time to mend a broken heart, especially one that belongs to 7 billion human beings. And finally, R, for reverence. To practice reverence is to look past the form and see the sacred presence of God in, as, and through all things. To practice reverence is to remember that there really is only one of us here, ever. In the Science of Mind on page 299, it reads, God in me is unified with God in all. I am one with all people, with all things, with all life. As I listen in the silence, this voice of all humanity speaks to me and answers the love that I hold out to it. I am one with life. I wait in the silence while the Great Spirit hears this message to the whole world. We don't open the fountainhead by forcing someone or something, and that includes ourselves, to change. It actually comes from revering and loving what already is. We open the fountainhead when we hold for ourselves and others the same awe and appreciation we feel when we look at something beautiful, like a mountain or an ocean or a cloud revealing the sunlight. For each of us is beautiful in a profound way. And again, to that Science of Mind article, Jones again writes, contained within the wisdom of this awareness lies the potential for the healing of the heart of humanity. How could we possibly conspire to do harm to another when we see ourselves and the living presence of the divine in that person? How could we possibly conspire to do harm to another, any other person or living thing on the planet? How could we possibly conspire to do harm when we see ourselves and the divine in them? And that's where the big reveal, that big truth bomb is from these last 5 weeks. All of that power we talked about, all of those personally transformative practices we pulled apart and really looked at closely these last 5 weeks, they add up to this. When we come from our place of personal power, we begin to change the world. Note that I didn't say we can change the world. I didn't say that if we do certain things, we might possibly could make a difference. I said that when we come from our place of power, that is P, a place of passion and purpose. O, a place of oneness with all. W, knowing our holy worthiness. E, consciously embracing change and evolution. And R, we let our radiant love light shine brightly everywhere we go in every situation. When we do these things, we are actively changing the world. Let that sink in while I share an incredible poem with you, which was written by Ken Wilber. As Plotinus knew, let the world be quiet. Let the heavens and the earth and the seas be still. Let the world be waiting. Let the self-contraction relax into the empty ground of its own awareness and let it there quietly die. See how spirit pours through each and every opening in turmoil and bestows new splendor on the setting sun and its glorious earth and all its radiant inhabitants. See the cosmos dance in emptiness. See the play of light in all creatures, great and small. See finite worlds sing and rejoice in the play of the very divine, floating on a glory that renders each transparent, flooded by a joy that refuses time or terror, that undoes the madness of the loveless self and buries it in splendor. Indeed, let the self-contraction relax into the empty ground of its own awareness and let it there quietly die. See the cosmos arise in its place, dancing madly and divine, self-luminous and self-liberating, intoxicated by a light that never dawns nor ceases. Let ecstasy overflow and outshine the loveless self, and sing. Sing triumphantly with St. Catherine, my being is God, not by simple participation, but by a true transformation of my being. My me is God. And let the joy sing with Dame Julian, see, I am God. See, I am in all things. See, I do things. And let the joy shout with the Zen master, this very body is the body of Buddha, and this very land, the pure land. And this earth becomes a blessed being, and every I becomes a God, and every we becomes God's sincerest worship, and every it becomes God's most gracious temple. And I rise to taste the dawn, and I find that love alone will shine today. And the shining says to love it all, and love it madly, and always endlessly, and ever fiercely, to love without choice, and thus enter the all. To love it mindlessly, and thus be the all, embracing the only and radiant divine, now as emptiness, now as form. Together and forever, the godless search undone, and love alone will shine today. Thank you.